We start our journey in the early 19th century when the Finns, for the first time, gained autonomy. In 1809, Finnish territories were transferred from Swedish rule to the Russian Empire. The new Grand Duchy needed a proper national center because until that time, Stockholm was the only capital where Finnish matters were dealt with. The Emperor Aleksanteri I decided that Helsinki, a small town at that time, would be the new capital because of its advantageous geopolitical location. In the 19th century, wars frequently threatened seaside habitations, but Helsinki was protected by an island, Viapori. Helsinki is situated also on maritime crossroads in the eastern Baltic Sea. Hence, the Russian Emperor saw the buffer potential of the city to secure St. Petersburg from Western maritime attacks, alongside Russia's other naval fortresses, such as Kronstadt and later Tallinn. So, for the protection of St. Petersburg, several Russian garrisons were situated in Helsinki, and Russian naval forces were moved to Viapori Island. But Helsinki had other advantages. As an open sea port, it could accelerate international trade and cultural connections to continental Europe. And Helsinki had land connection with the Russian Empire. It was then decided that Helsinki was to become a modern and thriving city. The Emperor commissioned a German architect, Karl Ludwig Engel, with the enormous task of planning an entire capital that would host vital state functions. Helsinki was built carefully according to modern European standards at the time, in a classical and coherent style. Urban development was boosted by simultaneous administrative and cultural processes. The new state was led by the Senate and the Governor General's office. State administration was assisted by civil servants sent from the imperial center. Finnish administrative personnel were also trained in St. Petersburg in the beginning, until their education was arranged locally. Helsinki was to become also a university town. The Royal Academy of Turku, which was founded in 1640 during the Swedish reign, was now moved to the capital and renamed as the Imperial Alexander University. The university was overseen by the emperor himself, and it was customary that the heir for the throne was appointed as chancellor. This arrangement revealed the true political importance of higher education. The university was also significant for another reason. It laid the foundation for modern disciplines and science in Finnish language. The university became the heart of an emerging Finnish nation-building project, attracting and involving the best minds from around the country. It produced the new Finnish political, administrative, and cultural elite. Being the first national university, it promoted movement from the countryside to the capital. Students' associations still today organize themselves according to the regional association of their members. The new capital and the imperial setting also meant a new direction for the mobility of people. Over the long centuries of Swedish rule, the aristocracy and intelligentsia were Swedish speakers. Now, the Russian aristocracy started to spend the summers in the new urban environment of Helsinki, which was praised as small but elegant and peaceful city on the seaside. Visits became even more frequent when the steamship line between St. Petersburg and Helsinki was opened in 1837. From the mid-19th century, villas and summer houses were built to accommodate Russian aristocrats. Due to the improved transport connections, Russian merchants, craftsmen, and shopkeepers arrived to start businesses. A new marketplace was needed for the growing number of peddlers and other small salesmen, with a market hall eventually built to protect the quality of goods in inclement weather. Russian industrialists established the first sugar factory, brewery, gasworks, and even ice cream production facility. Cutting-edge horticultural practices were introduced by Russian gardeners. Mobility from Russia accelerated when the rail line connecting the Finnish capital with the imperial center opened in 1870. As a result, the Russian civil population grew steadily, and so did the Russian military personnel. By the turn of the century, over 25,000 soldiers were stationed in the city, including naval forces, infantry, artillery, and even the Don Cossacks. The Russian army displayed an ethnic variety. After 25 years of army service, Jewish soldiers were allowed to settle down in Helsinki with their families. Many of them made a living by selling clothes, foodstuff, and other wares. The first Jewish community built a place of worship for themselves. Similarly, Tatars stayed in the capital and went on to introducing fur trading. The Tatars created the first Muslim community in Finland. And while Helsinki was never fully Russified, the Russian inhabitants' religious and cultural needs were attended to. Russian Orthodox churches were built, and even a Russian language theatre was established, where the first ever opera performance in Finland was held. Apart from the mobility from Russia, entrepreneurs and manufacturers arrived from Germany, starting already in the mid-19th century due to the new steamship lines and growing trade connections. They established hotels, factories, and stores, leaving a lasting mark still present today. Helsinki became an international and multilingual city by the end of the 19th century. The expansion of domestic railroads made Helsinki also the true economic capital of the country. Railways that were connected to the port and merchant fleets stimulated a profound structural change to the economy: industrialization. The new era of industrialization boosted labor force mobility from the countryside and fostered the fast growth of the working class. But industrialization also advanced entrepreneurialism and the rise of Finnish bourgeoisie. Thus, the city started to expand towards the east with rather humble tenement areas of the working class, and to the west with wealthier dwellings of the urban middle class. This segregated habitation planted the seeds of social tension in early Helsinki society, bursting out later in the Civil War. The First World War brought new Russian troops to Helsinki. Due to the country's autonomy, the Finns didn't serve in the Russian Imperial Army or Navy. They just paid for them. The war was fought only by the Russian military stationed in Finland. After the war, the Bolshevik Revolution made Finnish independence possible. The departure, however, was not painless. A civil war broke out in Finland, resembling very much the Russian one. Soldiers of Russian garrisons, still on Finnish territory after the war, took sides with the Finnish communists. The white Finnish government had to flee to northern Finland, and the Reds established a People's Republic in Helsinki. The runaway government asked for help from Germany, and the Kaiser sent forces to the rescue. A bitter struggle took place in Helsinki, ending with the victory of the Whites and many Reds detained in prisoner of war camps. Russian and German troops left the country, but the Bolshevik Revolution and the dreadful experience of the Finnish Civil War had an impact on cross-border migration. Political refugees from the Russian nobility, bourgeoisie, and intelligentsia were escaping the new Bolshevik rule. In exchange, embittered Finnish communists left Finland to build an ideal society on the other side of the border. Helsinki, now the capital of an independent state, entered a new phase of nation building with a view towards modernity. Connections to and mobility from the Soviet Union became scarce by the 1920s. This was balanced by a rising interest in and increasing relations with Germany, carrying yet another long-term consequence. Finnish attitudes towards the Russians changed dramatically when the Soviet Union attacked Finland in 1939. Helsinki was bombed. While the Red Army was unable to fully invade the country during the Second World War, Finland lost Eastern Karelia. This launched a huge refugee crisis where the Finnish population of Karelia left that was now Soviet territory. These refugees were resettled around Finland, as well as in Helsinki, with remarkable success. New houses were built on the outskirts of Helsinki and the city expanded. But there was another type of migration due to the war. The Finns sent their children to Sweden for safekeeping from Russian bombings. Some never returned, some came back, having undergone a life-defining experience. Helsinki once again began to change after the Second World War. Hectic construction of new residential areas started in the 1950s because of the enormous pressure of migration from the countryside to the city. People moved to Helsinki to find employment, education, and a new lifestyle. Migration affected not only the emergence of the new suburbs, but also the modernization of city transport. The movement of people was followed by the movement of enterprises, factories, and offices, all of which needed new buildings and thus quick reactions from city planning authorities. The massive wave of domestic migration had dramatic impact on Helsinki's social texture. Urbanization and industrialization improved employment rates and promoted the steady rise of living standard and the strengthening of the middle class. These factors assisted in building a consensus-based political culture that eventually introduced the idea of a welfare society. Whereas domestic migration reached new heights, mobility in Europe during the Cold War was a different story. The Iron Curtain between East and West hindered especially the movement of Russians and other Eastern Europeans. These factors had an influence on Helsinki's dubious development towards a homogeneous culture that was simply light years away from the vibrant international atmosphere seen in the late 19th century. For moments, however, Helsinki brought the world together. In 1952, the city organized the Olympic Games, and in 1975, the time was ripe for the Helsinki Summit of the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe. The Helsinki Accords signed by 35 heads of state, aim to foster also the free movement of people. Even to this day, there are human rights organizations calling themselves Helsinki committees after the foundational agreements made in Helsinki back in 1975. In the 1970s, Helsinki received the first refugees from faraway countries like Vietnam and Chile. Perhaps because the memories of the Second World War remained fresh, or due to the Cold War settings, these people were welcomed with compassion. This attitude was to change by the end of the Cold War. The ultimate keyword of the 1990s was internationalization. In practice, this meant a fluid approach to mobility. It was time to re-establish relations between East and West. Helsinki once again became a crossroad between the Baltic states, Russia, the Nordic countries, and a reunified Germany. After Finland joined the European Union in 1995, the focus of interest and main target of movement was toward the continent. European connectedness brought job opportunities, and new nomads traveled to make a living and returned home for weekends. The European context also offered exchange programs for university students. The collapse of communist regimes carried a peculiar consequence on mobility. The Finnish government welcomed the so-called returnees, or people of Finnish origin, who could not leave the Soviet Union earlier. In the early 1990s, 25,000 people arrived in Finland, and a considerable part of this group settled in Helsinki. Since many of them did not speak Finnish anymore, a Russian-speaking population started to grow in the capital, the first time since the 1920s. Similarly, mobility from and to Estonia increased. Finnish firms moved to Tallinn because of the cheap labor costs and lower taxes. On the other hand, Estonian workers were sought after in Helsinki. From early 1990s, African and Middle Eastern refugees began to arrive to Finland through the Russian border. While they were initially resettled around Finland, many refugees from this period eventually moved to Helsinki, where jobs were easier to find and their kinsmen or friends lived. Helsinki became an increasingly multicultural city, with all the advantages and challenges this comprised. According to current estimates, about 20% of the population's mother tongue is something other than the official languages of the state, Finnish, Swedish, or Sami. This proportion creates pressure on developing new approaches to integration policy. One of the major challenges is to prevent segregation in city planning and in schooling. While international migration raised opposition in Finnish society, the other side of the coin is that Finnish firms, many of them located in Helsinki, have exhibited warning signs stemming from a lack of skilled labor. This indicates that soon work-related migration will increase dramatically. Yet, Helsinki has an enormous potential to tackle the forthcoming difficulties because the city's prevailing atmosphere, against all odds, is still liberal and inclusive. In addition, and even more importantly, this is a place that looks back to a multicultural past. Helsinki has an embedded wisdom of how to make the best out of migration flows for the development of the city and the well-being of its inhabitants.